Good evening, everyone. This is Mel here from Sneakers Corner. Hope you're all having a nice Saturday. This is a roundup sort of video. I'm going to be looking at different images of Beersheba and Jerusalem and Mecca via Google Earth. I'm also going to be giving you some additional information that you won't have heard before. And then finally, I'm going to be just sharing a hunch I had the other day, which I was going to do a live stream about, and then I changed my mind in the last minute because I didn't feel it was that strong. But at the same time, I just thought, well, maybe I should share it, even though it might be not very well established, but it might lead to something. I'll explain about that later. So I will flag it that it is a level 0. It's just so there's no confusion. It's not meant to be a high level thing. It's just an idea. And very often by sharing ideas, sometimes it hits something else and someone comes up with something new. So you never know. That's the way it works. So let's start. I just want to say hello to Nadaverse and House of Sophia and anyone else that's there that I may have missed. And let's start going. Right. Yeah. Okay, so the title of this today is Beersheba, Mecca and Jerusalem. And it's going to be focused on two particular areas, which is Hagar's wandering and why was far south picked for Mecca. I'm just wondering whether everyone can see me. Yes, I just had to double check because on my phone it looked like nothing was appearing. So it's just probably a lag there. Now, let's get stuck in then. Now, the story of Hagar and Ishmael, particularly the story that you find in the Islamic tradition, concerns Ishmael and Hagar being sent away by Abraham, apparently in Mecca, and she runs between two hills, and then she discovers a miraculous spring of water. And it's a story that has led to the practice of what Muslims do today. They run between what they call two hills. The logic of running between two hills back and forth doesn't seem to strike them, because one of the first things you would do if you were in the hot sun, 40 or 50 degrees, the last thing you would do is run around like a headless chicken, because that's only going to make things worse. So at the very least, you'd take it easy, slow down, maybe go under shade, but you wouldn't be running around. But anyway, that's a minor little detail, little hole in the story, but it's based obviously on the story of Hagar and Ishmael in Genesis 21. There's no earlier account. This is the original, and this is what Islam has copied, as it has done many things. Okay, so Genesis 21, verse 14. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. All right. Now, it doesn't say how much water she was given. He set them on her shoulders. Now, what does that mean? He set them. I presume it means the food and water and possibly the boy? Or would it be just the food and water? I'm just thinking about it now for a second. And then sent her off with the boy. I would presume it means food and the water. Does that seem reasonable to you? Now, it doesn't say how much water she was given. One estimate in terms of how much a skin of water would contain would be 30 pounds or 15 liters. Now, in my private life, one of the things I like to do is I like to go on long summer hikes, and this is quite useful sometimes, and also go on long cycles. So I'm very familiar with how much water you need if you're traveling in the heat of the sun. On one journey, I traveled from the south of France up to the north of France on one of the hottest days of the year, and I know pretty much that you could easily go through 4 or 5 liters of water in a day without even trying. You just literally the water, you just drink and drink and drink. So 15 liters. Talking about 2 people, obviously the child would need less water. At a stretch, I would say 3 or 4 days. So now there is a clue there. Wandered in the desert of Beersheba. So at least we know from the Bible story where they were. Now it would suggest that they were in Beersheba to begin with, and then wandered in the desert. So they started in civilization, then wandered in the desert. Okay, so how far could they walk? Well, if she's carrying all that stuff on her shoulders, 30 pounds of water is a lot, and if you take food as well, I can't imagine her being able to carry the boy much as well. Maybe a little for little parts of it, but I would say at a push, I hope this sounds reasonable. Maybe 20k they could make in a day, maybe 25 at a push. So I would say tops. This is really pushing it, but I would say tops. They could probably get 100 kilometers, maybe 3 or 4 days hard walking. Okay, so that's just looking at the text and just using common sense and what's feasible given what she has. The concern isn't the food. They could easily last weeks without food. That isn't the concern. The amount of water that they had, the fact it's in a desert. So presumably there's no place to top up. And actually that's part of the story, the fact that there was no place to top up until there was a miraculous event. Okay, so let's move on. When the water in the skin was gone, so that we're talking, as we say, 3 or 4 days tops, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Okay, so it's bushes. It could find bushes in the Hejaz. More typically, you'd find them further north, but that's nothing solid either way. But generally, you wouldn't see too much bushes further south. So that's a point. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away. Now, bow shot would be the distance you'd fire an arrow. So you're not talking far, maybe a few 100 meters tops, or maybe 200 meters. So you're not talking that far. First she thought, I cannot watch the boy to die. I'll say that again. First she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. Now, notice what she did. She basically just went far enough away that she didn't have to look at the boy dying. It doesn't say she ran back and forth. The boy was sitting down under the bushes. She went, say, a bow shot away, say 200 or 300 meters tops, if we're being generous. And then she sat down. It doesn't describe her running back and forth. So that's kind of important, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. So you can see There is a well appearing in the story. There was no running. There was one movement, and she sat down, and then this miracle happened. So it's very different. You notice that there's no mention of any hills, so that's significant. The only thing that's mentioned there is the bush. So and then the well, and then it says God was with the boy as he grew up. Now the story continues on, and then there's mention of what happened to him later in the life. But as far as the story goes, the story really ends there at that stage. That's a self-enclosed story. The only location mentioned is the desert of Beersheba in relation to this story. That's how I read it. I know there's other locations mentioned later, but it's in the context of when the boy grew up, and of course, at that stage, many things would be expected to have happened. Now, I would have thought that she wouldn't have carried on through the desert when she got her refill of water. I would imagine that she would probably have gone back to civilization, not carried on where she was going. Let's have a look further. So this is an example of a water skin from the Judean desert from 135 AD. So this would be similar to what was used for thousands of years, and so you could expect that she was carrying something like that on her shoulders. So, the fact that it describes her having the water skin placed on her shoulders makes sense. If you look at the size of that, that's the place you would put it if you're walking for any distance. Now, I have written here it could hold enough water for a woman and child for a couple of days at best. I'm being probably be a bit more generous in retrospect. About half an hour ago, I got an estimate of how many pounds of water it would hold, which was 30 pounds or 15 litres. So I've extended that by 2 days. It was a bit more than I thought. But we're still, so I doubled that distance as well for that reason. So we're really talking about being very generous here. 100k, maybe some people might say 50k is really pushing it, but it's amazing what people can do when they're really pushed to their absolute limit. But I would say 100k is probably about right. Now, during the summer, I was walking these sort of distances each day, so I have a fairly good idea of what a person can do. It is possible to walk 30k a day, but that wouldn't be with a child in hand, because they will slow you down big time. So I would say 20k if you're bringing a child along, because obviously you can't walk the poor child to death, So I would say 100k is a fair outer limit on what can be done. Yeah. So a few basic questions just for comprehension, just to make sure that we're not seeing things in the text and we're spotting what's important. Where did she wander? In the desert of Beersheba. Okay, that's kind of important, that bit. Did she run between hills when the water ran out? Nope, the text only says she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away. Nothing more. Okay. Does the text mention Safa or Marwa? No. So where did that come from? Now, Marwa is in the Bible, but in Hebrew it's Moriah. And I can see how there might be an attempt to connect her with Moriah, because Moriah was where Abraham brought Isaac to sacrifice him. So I can sort of understand how they might put those two things together, but that's a muddying of the waters, pardon the pun. They've confused two stories, or basically they've thrown two stories together that shouldn't be confused. I think that's quite a serious confusion. Just going to have a look and see what your messages are at the minute. So hello to Dragon Daenerys and Mariana. And hello to Islam Defender Yaya. How are you, Yaya? No. Does it mention a well? Yes, it does mention a well. So that detail is correct. Does the text call it the Zamzam? No, it doesn't. Okay, so that's an additional detail that's added to the story. So that's the story there once more. As you can see, not playing games or anything. There's no mention of hills. There's no mention of Mecca. There's no mention of the Hijaz. There's no mention of the Zamzam. All of these details have been added. There's no mention of Safa or Marwa. This is not in the text. So in summary, it occurred in the desert of Beersheba. There's no mention of any hills, and especially no mention of Safa and Marwa. No mention of her running between any hills. Now, what I'm going to do next, if all goes to plan, I'm going to go to the Google Earth and show you the actual place. Let's see if this works. Right, here we go. Now, so this is Beersheba. Okay, now, we presume that she was dropped off in the southern part of Beersheba. Obviously, it wouldn't have been as populated back in those days. But as you can see, it's pretty flat. Let's go down a bit. Any hills there? Now, if you imagine an inch on the screen is about 1 kilometer. So from here to the bottom of the screen, you're talking about, that's 5 kilometers, okay? So you imagine traveling for a few days. That's probably about 2 days there. All flat. Okay, it's flat as far as I can see. It's all flat. There's no hills. Okay, there's a few little hillocks, but essentially there's no hills, is there? It's all flat. So I think that whole story is basically bogus, if I may say so. So on that score, it mentions Safa and Marwa, but let's have a look at Mecca. Let's go to Mecca and just check that place out. So here we go. Long way down. Here we go. So this is Mecca. Now, let's zoom in. Hopefully this works for me. Now, there's a good chance I may have lost. Let's try that again. It can play games with me here, so just bear with me. Okay. Okay. Now, right, so there's the Masjid al-Haram, and there's Safa and Marwa, as you can see there in the center of the map. Let's zoom down. Let's go a little bit closer. You see those little roofs? Okay, this is the runway between the hills of Safa and Marwa, and there is the Kaaba. Okay, now let's have a look at how high these hills are. Do you see hills there? Dead flat, isn't it? In fact, it couldn't be flatter. The only thing that's actually making a dimple there is the roofs over it. You can see here's a hill. Here's a hill. This is as flat as could be. So, yeah, small and humble, just in case people might confuse them with mountains, as Shakira might say. So, yeah, so you can see this has got so many problems with it. So they have taken that fictional story that, I call, not the biblical story, but the Islamic version of it, with the two of them running between the hills, and now having come up with that story, they need hills, but all they've got is these next to the Kaaba. So they basically have got two boulders and they say, well, that will do. And presumably people must have noticed that these are not hills over the centuries. So what did they do? They roof it so that if you're in there, you just don't see it because you're in an enclosed area. But if you ever look at the footage of what goes on inside there, it's couldn't be flatter. It's a bit like walking through an airport, and they even have air conditioning. And I don't begrudge them their air conditioning, but if they really wanted a challenge, I would just say if they ran to the top of this hill down into the valley and up the other side, that would be running between hills, but not this thing. This is like running to catch a flight, so not really much of a challenge. Okay, now I'm going to now go to Jerusalem. So look at Jerusalem. This may crash on us again, but we'll just see what we can do. I can always reload it if there's a problem. Now let's just zoom in here. Right, so we see the Western Wall there, and we see the Holy Sepulchre. Now, essentially, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was to the left. Let me just, this might be a bit better there. So, okay, you got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to the west of the Dome of the Rock, not that far apart. You have the Valley of Kidron there, and then you have Gethsemane's over here. Church of Mary Magdalene. What else? Zacharias' tomb and so on. City of David is just south of the temple. Okay, now put down so you can see that's the Kidron Valley. Okay. Now, where is Moriah? Well, Moriah is here. It's basically the Temple Mount, which is not. It's not from this angle here. It doesn't look pretty much. Maybe from this angle you can probably see it a bit better. There is certainly an ascent there. There's the Western Wall, so you can see it's on a bit of a height. There's the valley. Let's zoom through. Now, Marwa is Moriah. Okay, that is confirmed. So that is that place. Okay, go a little bit further. Right, just about up here, across the valley, up this hill. I may have to just come out a little bit. Let me see how we do this. Go zoom out a bit for a second. This is a bit of an experiment now. You'll have to bear with me here. Okay. Right. Now, right, this here that I've been trying to show you is Mount Scopus. Okay, Mount Scopus. Just to prove it, Mount Scopus, Jerusalem. Okay, happy with that? Mount Scopus, right? Ooh, that's pretty cool. Okay, you can see how close it is to the Western Wall there. Yeah. So you can literally go down the hill and over to Mount Scopus. You have Dome of the Rock there. Okay. Valley there. Okay. That is Safa. And let me get rid of this. Oh, okay. Have to reload. That is Safa and the other place is Marwa. Okay. So that's Marwa and that's Safa over here. Okay. Problem is that as we can see, if I go back to Beersheba, okay, it's way too far away for Hagar to have wandered to the real Safa and Marwa. Okay, so I hope that's enough to convince you that this is bogus. That they've basically taken two stories. She didn't get down to Mecca; it's too far. She didn't go to Jerusalem. Again, I would suggest it's too far. I would hazard a guess that that's. Let me just see if we can work it out from here. But we're talking good old distance. Maybe I suppose she could she could possibly actually scrape to Jerusalem, and maybe that's the logic behind it. But the thing is, there's plenty of waterways along the way, and historically there are 5 different pools of water in Jerusalem, so she wouldn't have had any issues getting water. So even allowing for the fact that she could potentially walk there with the amount of water that she had, there would have been pools there. That's one problem. But the other thing is, the text does say that she was wandering in the desert of Beersheba, and that's south of Beersheba. It's not north of Beersheba, so that excludes the possibility of going to Jerusalem. So I would say that Jerusalem isn't an explanation for this addition to the story. It's not in the biblical story, and definitely Mecca is not a possibility either. It's just not logical. It doesn't make sense. Why would she go all that way to another desert area? It doesn't make any logical sense. Okay, so on that note, we'll just come back. Now, I want to get back to the PowerPoint now for a second. Right. Now, I wanted to kind of add a note about Safa. Maybe some people may not be convinced of the identification of Mount Scopus with Safa. It wasn't just the Greek historian Josephus that referenced Mount Safa. The Mishnah, a rabbinical literary collection of Jewish oral traditions from the 3rd century CE, uses the term Sophim to refer to places that function as lookouts around Jerusalem. This word is pronounced as Sophim, and being the plural form of lookout, the singular would have been Sofa, and this I've just written down is from a viewer. And apologies, I can't remember which of you mentioned that in a comment under one of the videos. I remember taking note of it, but if you could leave a note saying it was you, and thank you. Safa in Hebrew means to watch. So Mount Scopus is, sorry, I made a mistake there, but Mount Scopus is Mount Safa. I should really change that here. That's what I meant to do. Right. Mount Scopus equals Mount Safa. If you think of the word telescope, that's linked with the idea of sight. Okay. So Safa means to watch, or it's a lookout. The places around Jerusalem were referred to as Sophim, lookouts. So really, that's pretty well determined. We've got 2 confirmations of the use of that word in Hebrew. I don't think there's any argument, and I challenge any Muslim to find me a text referring to Safa and Marwa in Mecca in the 6th century, the 5th century, the 4th century, or any century before that. I don't think you'll find any unless you fabricate it. Now, why are they praying south and with their backs to the Dome of the Rock? That's the next thing that we're going to look at now. So this kind of intrigues me. It seems rude, doesn't it, that they've got this really important building built supposedly by Abdul al-Malik. Well, it's been rebuilt over the centuries, but it's believed that it's been built by Abdul Malik, and it should be really important. Why would they pray like this? Why not go to the side and pray south? But why does it seem that they are intentionally putting their back to the Dome of Rock when they pray into Mecca? So this is a thing that I'm kind of curious about. And then I'm also trying to figure out still reasons behind the choice of Mecca, which is an odd choice to start a new religious site sometime in the late 7th or early 8th century. Okay, and the exact starting point for Mecca is not 100% certain, but probably the best bet would be probably the early 8th century. But in any case, why did they choose to bring it all the way south? They had a perfectly good place here in Jerusalem. Why did they go south? So that's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Now, was there something about this practice that led to a place far south being chosen whose name was plucked from the Quran? Obviously referring to Mecca, only mentioned once in the Quran, which suggests that there's something strange about that word, that it's not really the name of a place, but was used to mean something else originally. That's usually what happens if you see a word mentioned only once. If it was the name of an ancient place, surely it would have been mentioned several times. Now, I want to draw your attention to the following. This is from St. John of Damascus, and he explains the tradition of praying to the east. So I'm thinking about the orientation of people. Now, I'd like to bring in the work of Thomas Alexander, who has done an excellent series with Jay Smith. I'm sure many of you have watched it. And he talks about the fact that there were obviously Christians, different sects of Christians at that time, but there were also anti-Trinitarians. And we know what the Christians did in terms of praying. We know that they prayed to the east, but there's a possibility that in being anti-Trinitarian, they may have expressed their opposition by praying in a different direction. And the choice of direction might have been based on something that they had found in the Christian tradition. I'm thinking out loud here. This is a hunch I have. In any case, this is from St. John of Damascus, and maybe we'll get some clues here. It is not without reason or by chance that we worship towards the east, but seeing that we are composed of a visible and invisible nature, that is to say, of a nature partly of spirit and partly of sense, we render also a twofold worship to the Creator. Just as we sing both with our spirit and our bodily lips, and are baptized with both water and spirit, and are united with the Lord in a twofold manner, being sharers in the mysteries and in the grace of the Spirit. Since therefore God is spiritual light, and Christ is called in the Scriptures Son of Righteousness and Dayspring, the east is the direction that must be assigned to his worship. So that's a nice sort of sense of why they do it. It's almost like a sacrament in a way, because there's an inner meaning and an outer meaning to the practice of praying to the east. And he goes on, for everything good must be assigned to him from whom every good thing arises. I'm just frozen here. Indeed, the divine David also says, sing unto God, ye kingdoms of the earth. O sing praises unto the Lord, to him that rideth upon the heavens of heavens towards the east. Now, I was struck by that line, the idea of God riding upon the heavens. And we've already spoken about the idea of Muhammad and Jesus being one and the same, at least originally. And here is a reference to Jesus, perhaps, riding upon the heavens. And maybe that's where the story of Muhammad ascending and riding on a buraq, borrowing from Persian motifs, obviously. But maybe that's where the convergence of ideas came from, perhaps. Moreover, the scripture also says, and God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And when he had transgressed his command, he expelled him and made him to dwell over against the delights of paradise, which clearly is the west. So then we worship God, seeking and striving after our fatherland. Moreover, the tent of Moses had its veil and mercy seat towards the east. Also the tribe of Judah, as the most precious, pitched their camp in the east. So you see how this idea of west and east and so on. Also in the celebrated Temple of Solomon, the gate of the Lord was placed eastward. Moreover, Christ, when he hung on the cross, had his face turned towards the west, so we worship striving after him. And when he was received again into heaven, he was borne towards the east, and thus his apostles worship him, and thus he will come again in the way in which they beheld him going towards heaven, as the Lord himself said, as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So then, in expectation of his coming, we worship towards the east. But this tradition of the apostles is unwritten, for much that has been handed down to us by tradition is unwritten. Now, it's interesting, he says that Jesus hung on the cross and had his face turned towards the west. Now, let's just stop here for a moment and let's go back to our Google Earth just for a moment. Right, we're just going to go back to Jerusalem so we can visualize this. Right. Okay, so Jesus was crucified. Oh, try that again. Well, one more time. Okay, so this is Dome of the Rock, or the temple originally was there. Now, Jesus was crucified over here in the west, presumably. At least he was buried there. He was praying on the cross, faced this way. He had his back to the Dome of the Rock. Now, my hunch, and it is just a hunch, is maybe, just maybe, the anti-Trinitarians decided that they wanted to pray in a different direction to the Christians to distinguish themselves from them. And what better way would it be than to pray with their backs to the temple the way Jesus did when he was dying on the cross? Now, Jesus praying in this direction, westwards. Okay? But the essential thing is that they pray with their backs to the Dome of the Rock. Now, we just need a reason why it would have been praying. Let's say if they were gathered here, why would they pray their back to the Dome of the Rock, but also southwards towards Mecca? Okay, so that's the thing that we need to figure out. So we have, just to make it clear, this is north up here, south, east, and west. So just try and bear this in mind. North, south, east, and west. Sorry, north, south, east, and west. If Christians were praying, let's just for argument's sake say there was a church here. At that time, Christians would have been praying eastwards. Okay, so the priest and the laity would have all lined up and prayed towards the altar, which would have been on this side, and they would all pray together in that direction for all the reasons that St. John of Damascus said. Okay, so bear that in mind. Now we need a reason why the anti-Trinitarians might have said, no, we're not going to pray east, we're going to point southwards. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for. Let's go back. Now, okay. Now, okay. Right, so I came across this. I was watching a video online, and I heard this explanation about the Latin Mass. Obviously, Latin Mass goes way back to the 7th century, And bear in mind that in the Middle East, in Syria and the Holy Land and so on, the Latin Mass doesn't necessarily apply to what was going on there. Mind you, there may have been common elements across the different denominations. If we can use the word denominations, I suppose we can back then. There's certain divisions, let's say. So bear that in mind. So I'm not confusing things, but I'm just suggesting here that there might be some common elements, even though this is a Latin Mass, might be some common elements that was also seen in the other rites. Okay? So moving the lectionary in the Latin Mass and its significance. So this is from Monsignor George Moorman, Latin Mass Explained. He says, after the reading of the gradual or tract, the server carries the missal to the left or gospel side of the altar. According to an old custom, church and altar should be erected in such a manner that the priest faces east ad orientem when offering Mass. If this custom is followed, the priest will face towards the north when reading the Gospel. As the south, with its luxuriant vegetation, was regarded as a type of the realm of grace, so the cold north, with its extensive wastes, came to be regarded as the realm of evil. Do you get that? So the practice was to pray north, or to read from the Gospel to the north. Is almost like they're praying the Gospel onto the evil north. Whereas they on the south they had just the regular readings. That was the realm of grace in the south. And if you think about the right hand side of the priest, the right hand of God, the right hand was always the good side, the left was always the bad side. Yeah. If you think of, I'm trying to think of the word, but there's a word, it escapes me, that's related to left, that means evil. I'm sure you'll remember it if you write it in the comment. I can't remember. It might come to me in a second. But anyway, bear that in mind. But when the gospel of Christ was preached, the face of the earth was renewed, and love for God and for virtue was rekindled in the hearts of men. Okay. Now, so what is he talking about? So he's saying that the realm of grace was here, and this up here was the evil north. Okay, so they were praying this direction, and the realm of grace was there. Now, if the priest faces the north while reading the gospel, then it makes logical sense that anti-Trinitarians would do the opposite, i.e. pray to the south, a negation of the practice. It also held the sense of being a realm of grace, pardon the spelling mistake there, and therefore a new dispensation could be logically argued for. Now, I'm just going to come back a second and just show you a video. And get it to work. No, doesn't seem to work. Oh, that's a shame. Okay, I was going to show you a quick video that shows what happens. Let me just go back to. I'll try one more go and just see if it works this time. No, it doesn't. Okay. Right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint a second. And I will continue the discussion. So what happens in a Latin Mass is the altar server at certain moments in the Mass would take the lectionary that contains the readings and would bring it from the right side of the priest, which is basically the southern side of the altar, and bring it around the back of him and leave it on the left-hand side of the priest, which would be the northern side. And so my sense is that maybe looking for an alternative to what the Christians were doing, the anti-Trinitarians decided that south was where it was at. South had a connotation as the place of grace. The only thing that was a slight ink or a slight fly in the ointment is the fact that the normal sense of the south was a place of vegetation and so on, but in the case of Arabia, it was anything but it was a very barren desert. But at least it had the spiritual connotation as a realm of grace. So if people were trying to come up with a new economy of salvation, where they had dispensed with Jesus as the Son of God and saw him just merely as a servant, okay, then the logical sense of everything will have changed. And so perhaps they borrowed that idea of praying to the south. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that this goes radically against the tradition of Christians who predominantly pray facing east. But it ought to be noted that praying with one's back to the dome of the rock parallels Jesus praying from the cross with his back to the temple, the difference being that he was facing west. And just add this, Father Francis Spirago says, the epistle, the carrying across of the missal, the gospel, and the creed, which is done in a Latin mass, so that, from right to left and so on, are to remind us that the gospel was first preached to the Jews and being rejected by them was proclaimed to the Gentiles, many of whom believed and were baptized. So essentially, the right-hand side represents the side of the Jews, the left-hand side represents the Gentiles. So this idea of bringing the books to the left is, bringing it to the Gentiles. So in a sense, praying to the south would represent the reverse of that, taking it back from the Gentiles and giving it to the people of Abraham, perhaps. So that's my sense of it. Tell me what you think of that. And I'm coming back to you here in the chat. Let's see if there's any comment. Gina from Cologne says, hi Mel and everyone in chat except Yaya. Oh, poor old Yaya. Yeah. So we share love and life. Seems you don't want them at all. Now, unfortunately, Yaya, I haven't been able to keep up to speed with what you've been saying. I'm going to have a look at the chat afterwards. So hopefully you've gained something from this video today. I think the last part, my hunch about the South, is it's literally just a level 0 hunch and just thinking out loud, just throwing it out there. I've got no evidence to say that that the reason why they start praying south was anything to do with what I've just said. It probably would be a good area to do further research and look out for any clues that might indicate that this is the case, or if they had another reason. So what I'd be looking to see is, were there any writings from the 7th or 8th century which indicated that the anti-Trinitarians were talking about the South as the realm of grace, or in terms like that? And that would be an indicator that maybe this is the reason why way down in Mecca was chosen as their place to set up a new Disneyland for Islam. So on that note, thank you all for stopping by. I hope you have a really enjoyable remainder of the Saturday, and talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.